organizational learning. And we will record this session. So yeah, Catherine, go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Anna, and lovely to see you all. I hope everybody's having a great day. I'm really excited to be here. It's nice to see so many familiar faces on the call. I feel like we're amongst kindred spirits here. So you can go to the next slide. Jan, my partner in crime on all things presentation today. So my name is Catherine Howe, and as Anna mentioned, I'm the CEO and founder of the Convive Collective. We are a creative and strategic learning partner to climate-focused philanthropies. That usually means that private philanthropies call us up and they say, hey, we want to be a learning organization. Can you help us get there? And we say, yes, you've called the right people. And so on the next slide, I wanted to present my big aha moment that I've had after many years of working with private philanthropies and being on the receiving end of these calls, which is that oftentimes we're finding that our clients are do not have a shared language for what it actually means to be a learning organization. I'm seeing a lot of people nodding their heads like, yes, yes, we see this as a problem also. Oftentimes they'll call us and say, we want to have a learning culture. And I would say, what do you mean by that? And they'd be like, a culture of learning, or, we want to be a learning organization from, the nuts and bolts of organizational processes to how we, reflect and work together. But I found that oftentimes what happens, and you can move to the next slide, Jan, about why this has been a challenge, is that, philanthropies in particular, but I know, this is also true for other NGOs and nonprofits and, organizations in our sector in general. We're all really excited about being a learning organization. And so often what happens is somebody, maybe some of you on this call, are hired into positions to be, the director of evaluation and research, or the director of learning and evidence use. And you come into your position. This is what we see of our clients all the time, because these are really our people. And they look around and they're like, hey, so I've been, hired into this role to help my philanthropy become a learning organization. How do I do that? And so they go to Google and now ChatGPT and say, hey, what's out there on learning organizations? And ChatGPT and Google are coming up blank right now around what that actually means for our sector. And so we at Convive had assembled a cohort of learning leaders recently, of which Jan from Liliane Fonds, my partner in crime for today, was a part. And all of these learning leaders were saying, like, gosh, it's like so ineffective that when we come into our position, we basically have to start from scratch each time with creating an organizational learning strategy and, a roadmap to help our organizations get to where we want to be. So we were talking in this cohort, why don't we have a shared framework, and why would that be so helpful? Really, because it would help us have a shared understanding of what do we actually mean when we say a learning organization. We can also then get clear on what we aspire to, make a roadmap and a plan for how to get there, and also hold ourselves to account. Because I think we have a lot of loosey-goosey language in our sector around learning. And it's quite possible that we're all saying different things to each other when we use phrases like learning leadership, learning culture, learning processes, even learning activities. And so we at Convive right now are working on a project, and you can go to the next slide, please, to actually build a shared learning organization framework based on research and practice. So far we've done a preliminary lit review, mostly based on literature in the private sector, but also some literature on this in the philanthropic social good sectors. And what we're finding is that a learning organization really breaks down to 5 different components. So learning leaders, having your leadership model, create incentives for and promote learning behaviors. That decision-making within an organization is informed by organizational structures that are fit for purpose and enable learning. That you have learning champions that embody learning behaviors and competencies across the organization. They keep learning alive. And that learning is embedded into processes and systems. So if you're a private philanthropy, this looks like grant making. If maybe you're an NGO, this is thinking about your programmatic work, your knowledge management, your operations. And last but not least, the kind of the glue that holds everything together is learning culture. So we're actively working on this right now. In fact, we're thinking of adding a sixth component based on what the literature is revealing to us. And we're also piloting this framework and a corresponding maturity tool with a set of 12 different philanthropies. And so we had wanted to bring this to our conversation today just as food for thought for this group to see, how do these components land with you? We have some questions here that we are considering for each of these components that you can see up on the slide. And in a moment, I'll pass it to my colleague Jan at Liliane Fonds to talk through how he and his colleague Lois worked through a research project to understand what a learning organization would mean to Liliane Fonds. So with that, unless there are burning questions or like a hoop and holler for this framework that's hot off the press, like this is very much like version 1 that you're seeing, I'll pass it over to Jan and Lois. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. Nice to see you all, and a nice opportunity to share our learning journey as organization. It has been really useful to work with Kat in really designing our journey. But our journey actually started before working with Kat. It already started last year when my colleague Lois, who is here with me also on the call, did a research about learning organization. First of all, I'm from Liliane Fonds. My name is Jan Apperlo, and I'm the Learning and Knowledge Development Advisor at our organization, which is actually a new position, which I just started in January this year. Just as background, what is Liliane Fonds? We're an organization focusing on equal rights for children and youth with disabilities. We came from a private initiative background back in the 1980s, and we have been developing to a rights-based organization focused on the rights of children and youth with disabilities. We do that not ourselves. We do that through networks of partners in over 25 countries at this moment, mostly in Africa and in Asia, some countries in Latin America. And we use a core approach where we base ourselves on the strengths of the communities and strengthen communities in providing rehabilitation services to children and youth with disabilities. We are relatively stable in this volatile environment of funding. Our funding is mostly coming from private donations. Nevertheless, we have 2 reasons why we want to become a learning organization. One is more internal. We want to learn from our different approaches and programs. Do they actually work? Can we do them better? How can we scale them? Also, slightly internal, slightly external, we want to build our track record. Can we prove that what we do works to the outside world? And that is more the external goal to strengthen our lobby and advocacy initiative, to profile ourselves really as an expert with relation to our core strategy, which is community-based rehabilitation, and also be able to strengthen across and ensure there is sharing of capacities among our partners in the 25 countries where we work. So basically, that was the starting point and the ambition formulated in a more multi-annual plan. But as Kat rightfully said, how do we get there? So that's where my colleague Lois came in, who was an intern with us last year and did a research on this topic, also comparing it with other organizations. Lois, over to you.
Yeah, so as Jan said, last year I did an internship at Liliane Fonds with the question of giving them recommendations on how to become a successful learning organization. And for this, I used a mixed methodology. I combined a literature review on learning organizations in the field of NGOs with interviews with both external organizations who are focusing on learning to learn from their best practices, and also interviews with staff from Liliane Fonds to get an impression of how learning was organized and experienced at that moment. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. So in my literature review, I found that certain characteristics of learning organizations were of special importance. So, for example, first, it is crucial that organizations create a learning culture, as was mentioned before, which really encourages and supports continuous employee learning, critical thinking, and risk taking. So this involves accepting new ideas, allowing mistakes, and also learning from these experiences. Also, it is important to have continuous feedback, reflection, and knowledge sharing within an organization. And these should really be day-to-day functions of teams and the organization itself. Third, it is also important and necessary to adapt your practices, programs, and goals based on the lessons that are learned from previous projects or research that is done, and not to just keep doing things because that's how you or your organization has always done it. And as was mentioned also before, that an organization's board or leadership plays a critical role in creating and maintaining a learning culture and should therefore really promote the role of learning throughout the whole organization. The interviews I did with external organizations also gave great insights into ways of overcoming barriers to learning and what practices should be implemented in organizations. It was especially interesting to talk to a wide range of organizations that all had their own strengths and developments in learning. So, in this figure, you can see a comparative timeline I made based on the interviews, and which shows the developments of learning in these different organizations. And as you see, it ranges very widely from Liliane Fonds, that at that point was designing their learning strategy, to organizations that had just started implementation, some organizations that had it strongly embedded in policies but were struggling with making it work in practice, to organizations such as Max Foundation that were already scaling successful practices based on evidence. Yeah, when putting my findings after also interviewing staff members from Liliane Fonds in the learning framework, my findings were that although Liliane Fonds had a very clear ambition to become a learning organization, they were still lacking a strategic plan of action to make this a reality. Also, I noticed that right now, the use and gathering of data for evidence-based decision making could still be improved, although the PML team was at that point already developing plans and strategies to do this. Among employees, there was definitely a clear interest in learning and also a motivation for it, but some felt like learning was not necessarily encouraged by their leadership, or they felt like there was little limited time or budget to actually make use of their learning opportunities. And even though there was a lot of knowledge available both within the individuals working at Liliane Fonds and knowledge that was gathered from previous programs, it was not used as efficiently as it could be. And when looking at the learning culture in general, you could really see that there was a silo culture. And with that, I mean that knowledge tended to stay within teams or within departments and was not necessarily shared between each other. And some people mentioned that they felt that there was a lack of psychological safety for learning, which is very important to have because that is what will allow you to take risks and try new things eventually. So in the end, based on the literature review and the interviews I did, I developed a list of key recommendations to Liliane Fonds. My first recommendation was to embed learning in the organization by incorporating it in policy, vision, mission, and strategy of Liliane Fonds. My second recommendation was for leaders and management in the organization to show commitment and support to learning as an organization as a whole, and also to make learning opportunities more known to the employees. Furthermore, I advise to work on a freer flow of information and knowledge between teams and departments, as this now often, like I said, seem to stay stuck within the silos. The presence of learning champions could definitely play a big role in improving this. Additionally, I recommended that learning should become a more structured part of each step within a project cycle, and to increase the gathering and use of data in projects and programs to then be able to make evidence-based decisions in their way of working. And lastly, I recommended the development of a platform for internal and external knowledge sharing. So internal within the organization, external also with their partners, to improve both the accessibility of knowledge gathered and also to enhance the institutional memory of the organization.
All right. Thanks very much, Lois. And thanks actually to this research, I guess. My position was actually created last year. And as part of this position, I was I'm now sharing a bit of the first steps I made in actually following up on the recommendations that Lois's research made. When it comes to learning leadership, we have a draft learning organization strategy ready, which is going to be approved hopefully very soon by our management team. And one of the ideas is that leaders share more clearly the lessons learned and also say their vulnerability in the lessons learned in organization-wide meetings. It's one of the actions that is small but can be very easily done. When it comes to decision-making structures and around that, we're working on a plan of more equitable decision-making structures where our partners and children and youth with disabilities have more of a say, and in which evaluation and learning become more standardized. They're not done for every process or every program at the moment, and we hope that it can be improved. The learning champions is also an approach we're adopting. As Lois said, we have a lot of colleagues that are very enthusiastic about learning. Now we want to tap into the potential of those colleagues and really have learning champions in each team that are going to be responsible for, well, actions to operationalize the learning organization strategy, but also for promoting a learning agenda with questions that are going to be answered in that particular year. And of course, to promote further with our colleagues of HR the use of the learning budget, where we find a good balance between individual interests and also the organizational needs. When it comes to learning embedded in systems and processes, internally we want to do much more with AI. We have a SharePoint full of knowledge, but it's very difficult to track which knowledge is relevant for what and what we can do more easily. So through AI tools, we believe we can do much better internally. With partners, we're piloting a platform this year to much more easily exchange documents, ensure that there is interaction for different topics that are important to our core strategy. Learning priorities are set with the learning agenda, because at the moment learning is quite scattered, I would say. There are so many interesting topics, but we have not made really choices where we want to learn on, and the learning agenda helps to focus and to then structure the learning experience related to those themes. Then lastly, related to the learning culture, already mentioned the all staff meetings, which was an initiative actually introduced only last year within our organization. Our organization has about 100 people in total, so it's quite a large meeting where people come and share. But besides that, one of the suggestions made, for example, was let's do a fail fest to celebrate what is not going well. But we believe it's a bit too far-fetched at the moment, and let's start small and create that psychological safety in smaller groups is one of the recommendations in the learning organization strategy. I hope this has given you a interesting insight in what we're doing as organization. I'm very happy, and I'm sure Kat as well, to answer questions about both the model and well, our experience on our learning journey as Liliane Fonds.
Great. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Lois, and thank you, Kat. I would like to indeed open the floor to see if there's any questions. You feel free to ask your questions in the chat or to raise your hand as well to ask a question. I already see a question here by Leonie. My question is, where does your organization tend to position a learning organization role? Like, where do you focus it? It's an organizational-wide concept, but is it more towards HR, meal, or programs level? Where is it positioned? Kat or Jan, would you like to?
Yeah, I'm happy to share, and then I'll pass it to you, Jan, and maybe other presenters or other folks want to come in. In our experience, we see that learning or philanthropies, because that's who we work with, are further along their learning organization journey. They're more mature. I'm thinking of Lois, the spectrum that you had when there's a learning professional who sits on the executive team. So this is somebody who's in like the C-suite of the organization who would be looking across learning. So usually they're like a director of learning or a director of effective philanthropy or director of impact measurement and evidence, something like that. We see that makes a huge difference in terms of access to resources, influence, and culture setting and expectation that they can do from that level of learning leadership as opposed to having learning be one person's job where they sit in programs or HR or just on the evaluation team. I would say that's necessary for advancing to like the highest level of learning organization maturity. It's pretty rare, I think, in our sector. So it's not that if you don't have that, you're not a learning organization. I just think that that's a great place to work up to build enough, value and demonstrate the utility of learning, so much so that you get hired or promoted into that kind of role with that kind of organizational commitment. What do you think, Jan? I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I can share where I'm sitting. I'm part of our team, which is called Program Strategy and Learning, which kind of has our technical experts, or what we call them thematic experts, and our PMEL advisors. And then my position is kind of in between. So I'm quite programmatically oriented, but directly when developing a learning organization strategy, you realize this goes far beyond far beyond my role. So I developed this learning organization strategy with someone from our HR team, with someone from our communication and fundraising team to really have this organization-wide emphasis. We're also running into this now, for example, with the learning agenda. The learning agenda is a agenda which I focused since I'm in the programs department of our organization on the programs, but there is a need beyond the programs department also to learn on what works, for example, in our communication and fundraising efforts, or what works in our needs for more inclusive recruitment, for example, which is in our business affairs department. So I really see that need, and also that confusion on where does learning sit. Is it really only a programmatic role? Internally, I explain it. Well, if my PML colleagues talk about learning in a specific project or program, I'm talking about learning more generally for the entire organization with a focus on the program department. I recognize the challenge in your question, Leonie.
Great to see that people also recognize this among different organizations. I also want to highlight the suggestion that was made on the chat by Annie Fiok Dominique about maybe the suggestion to develop checklists for teams to outline key elements and make sure that there's organizational consistency and that we're all like measuring the same indicators throughout the organization. Kat, I already saw you reacted to this. Would you like to expand a bit?
Sure. And Fiok, you can let me know if I understood you correctly, because where my mind went is to actually creating indicators in a way of measuring our progress towards becoming a learning organization. So really actually tracking and creating indicators, like we see these behaviors, we see leadership doing these things, we see that knowledge is acquired, accessed, utilized, downloaded, there's tons of different ways of measuring, across the different areas of the framework. And that's actually something that we're developing, because I think that's highly motivating to see, like, this is what success looks like. And we can actually track, our progress towards that success of becoming a learning organization. I'm thinking of our people who are directors of learning, showing their boss, like, look, we're like really moving the needle. We're watching our organization change. We are becoming a learning organization, or what we're doing is maybe not working because we're kind of stuck here. So just for folks who are familiar with USAID's CLA framework and corresponding maturity tool, that's exactly the format that ours will take, but it's really specifically for learning organizations and learning philanthropies. So if you're familiar with that model, that's how we're developing it. But I wonder, Anna, when you read back Anna Fioc's question, then I heard it a little bit differently, which was maybe about shared indicators for measuring collective impact, because I think that's something that NGOs, philanthropies struggle with, if you're working in different types of programmatic areas, and wanting to say, like, what difference are we making all together? Doing that collective impact measurement is a challenge that faces us in our profession. So maybe just a clarifying question of if I answered the question that was there, or if that was more where you were going, Anna Fiok. I'm looking through to find you.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. You did justice to the question. I think, one thing about learning organization is that, everybody wants to be a learning organization, but what are those indices? What are those elements that is needed? For example, you talk about the framework, and of the five, framework you did mention. But if you want to make it more intentional, people will ask yourself, what is learning leadership? What are those indices? What is the element? What should we put in place when it comes to learning leadership? Maybe someone will be reading through the checklist and say, okay, we will do this. Okay, fine, we will do this. We tick the box irrespective of that. And maybe we know that maybe we have done maybe 70 or 80% of that. We talk about learning culture. What are those indices that are involved in a learning culture? That helps the organization to be able to adapt quickly and be able to know that nobody is doing different things. I love the way it works, especially when you talk about in the CLA in maturity framework. I think that concept is also nice, because I think that's gone a long way to ensure that everybody is more systematic, is more intentional about learning. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you.
You're so welcome. And I'll just summarize back what you were sharing, Anafia, because it made me think of something that I know that Jan and his team are doing at Liliane Fonds, which is, so just to make sure I'm hearing you, I did answer your question, which is great. And you were wondering, like, yeah, it's helpful to have learning indicators so then we can see if our learning interventions are really working, right? Because we have a way of tracking them, and then we can adapt if they're not working, which is exactly right. That's why we're so fired up about this framework. And it made me think of something, Jan, maybe I'll pass it to you to speak about the idea of learning pilots, because I think that was new language and a new idea that you brought to our cohort program, which is like, hey, let's pilot something, learning culture with learning champions or with knowledge management, whatever it is, and track that pilot before it becomes like an organization-wide mandate. And I think that's actually really walking our talk as professionals, that we have that mindset of experimentation, even though it feels very meta because we're learning about learning. But I think it's really important. Do you want to share a little bit about that, Jan? I think folks would like to hear.
Yeah, so I think we're tracking progress in two ways, I would say. One, I think the learning champions are really important. They are going to be following up on those different learning pilots indeed. And well, we don't know if all the pilots are going to result into great progress. For example, these intervision groups of colleagues may be a very good idea to create more safe space, but does it really create generally more psychological safety? So the idea is that we reflect on an annual basis when we do our annual planning as organization. Are we really making the progress we want to make? And that's the second thing. I'm working with a set of indicators to track general progress, or building those indicators right now. So it's a bit of testing, piloting, and measuring against indicators we jointly set on where we want to go.
Great. I also see there's a lot of tools and tips that are also being shared in the chat. So make sure you have a look at that as well. Great to see that everyone also is working on this and hoping that this is maturity tool, that there's also tools more specific to our sector. It will be great to see this. I would like to close off this round of questions for now. Thank you all for the people who asked the questions, and also to our presenters again for also sharing so honestly and vulnerable like what you're working on, and showing that it's a learning process in all organizations. And we've seen that learning, going towards a learning organization entails a lot of different things. So we really want to take some time still to really dive into specific elements. We have a few speakers that will host different breakout groups to share from their experience in their organizations, how they've been working on these different elements that were mentioned in the presentation of Liliane Fonds and by Kat. To really enable us to really dive into some of these elements. So what we've done is pick out a few elements of this framework. And we have some experts who will host a breakout group on this. I'm sorry, I'm speaking and trying to share my screen at the same time. Given the number of participants, I propose we do 3 breakout groups. I just want to check with you, Jan, if that's okay. I know Jan was his backup for a breakout group, but was also very excited to join the other group. So I want to make sure we have the space for these great discussions. So what we'll do is host 3 breakout groups. I'll ask our host to quickly present what the breakout group will be about, and then you will be able to choose which breakout groups you would like to join. So we're focusing one group on learning culture, one on embedding learning into core processes and systems, and then one focusing more on evidence-based methods and how to work with that. So I would like to ask our breakout group hosts to quickly introduce themselves and the topic of their breakout groups to give you a little bit of a sneak peek of what's to come. So first, I would like to invite Nina Pavlovska, Learning Experience Designer at ZESA, to present her breakout group.
Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here and witness the amazing work that has been doing with Convive and Liliane Fonds. I'm Nina Pavlovska, and I'm Learning Experience Designer, and I've partnered with individuals, teams, and organizations to co-create transformative learning journeys, but also foster learning cultures in their organization. In fact, some of the people I've worked with are also part of this meeting, so that's wonderful to see that the journey continues. And during the session together, in the next 40 minutes, we'll get to, I'm bringing that experience in, distilling a few essential elements of learning culture being indeed the glue and what's probably the foundation for everything else to build on and to function. And basically what we're going to do is invite you to, through this essential elements, kind of diagnose your organization. How are we doing, and what are the opportunities and challenges that we see of moving forward, especially on the aspect of learning culture. So join me, and I hope you get to discover new things.
Thank you, Nina. All right, next, I would like to invite Sarah Abdelatif, founder and CEO of Propel.
Thank you so much, Anna, and great to be here. I hope you can all hear me well. Super happy to be here, and also, really nice to see some familiar faces. I mean, the learning world is not that big, but still nice. I'm Sarah. I am right now in Germany, usually in Cairo. I have a background working in really organizational learning for the last couple of years, advising organizations, NGOs, strategic partnerships on how we can actually improve learning processes, build a learning culture. And I'm also currently doing my PhD with Radboud University on this topic. So really my everyday basically is around learning. How can it look like? How can we improve it for the sector? And like Anna started, it's that what we also hear a lot is, that learning is, there's quite the momentum for organizations wanting to learn, but a lot of these models are still quite aspirational. It's seen as a nice to have, disconnected from work. But we all know that we need to learn more, be more adaptive in this world. And so because I shared this frustration of these models often being, quite high level, quite abstract, we wanted to look at the practical side. How can you actually make learning practical and put it into practice in organizations? And so through the work with organizations, we've actually developed a tool for doing that, which is called Propel. And so that kind of combines these elements of learning with state-of-the-art technology like AI. And so in this session, I actually want to look at that. How can we do that? How can we connect learning to processes in my organization? Give a bit of an example of how we've been doing that with organizations that are using Propel, and then obviously look at the participants' processes and see what we can do there. So yeah, join me for a nice conversation around processes and embedding learning.
Thank you, Sarah. And then finally, Leonie Meijering, Team Lead Learning Organization at War Child Alliance on evidence-based methods.
Thank you so much, Anna, and it's really nice to be here and hear so many passionate people talking about learning. It's really nice to do that because it's always a bit difficult to find people that know so much about learning in your own organization. So it's really amazing. Thank you. So this the session that I'll be hosting is on evidence-based methods and how at Watch Out, I think when you're talking about decision making based on evidence, we take it to the max because it's really about evidence-based methods. And with evidence-based, I mean rigorous research that proves that we make impact, that proves that we improve the well-being and resilience of children affected by conflicts, of communities. That are part of that. So we are looking at how these evidence-based methods, how they inform our organizational strategies, because it's not just the research that we do, but it's also scaling with other organizations. So in co-creation, and Nina is actually part of that work a lot. In co-creation with partner organizations, we keep on learning what works, what doesn't work. And yeah, so there's lots of work going on doing meal, data management related to sharing and scaling these evidence-based methods, developing learning paths around it. And also in this session, I would like to discuss the difficult balance sometimes between being evidence-based and then making locally led decisions. So it's also it's good to have evidence and to make decisions based on that. But how do we deal with localization if we in that perspective? So that session will be about evidence-based methods and how we see that in a learning organization. Welcome to join.
Great, thank you so much. All right, as Catherine said in the chat, there's a lot of great options. Unfortunately, you'll only be able to join one breakout group, but we'll make sure to really recap at the end what happened in the different breakout groups. So we'll share the findings. Yeah, so we'll have around 35-40 minutes for these discussions. I would like to ask my colleague Sil to open the breakout groups, and you should get a pop-up with or look below on your screen for breakout rooms, and there you should be able to choose which group, which room you can join. So please, yeah, have a look and go to the breakout group of your choice.
Yes, we were talking about how evidence-based methods alone can also be too much alone because there's so much around it when you program that not everything can be evidence-based, because then that also tends to drain the energy a bit. So you have evidence-based methods, but you combine them with good practices. Not everything always has to be evidence-based. And keeping an open mind was what we discussed. We were also talking about the siloed approaches it could lead to. You have a research team, you have a meal team, and it was interesting because I think it was Louisa who was saying that, hey, her position is actually in between these teams. And we are also finding that now at War Child, like how do you move from research space to implementation to contextualization and then also to scaling? So how do you avoid a siloed approach in that? That was something we discussed. And then I think we moved more into like, so once you have these either evidence-based methods or methods that work, or learning groups where products are created, sustainable products are created, how do you then also keep learning about it? And like we were discussing either learning groups or communities of practice that people are using to keep learning. We were talking about what are effective communities of practice. Yeah, and I think that is in very short summary what we've been discussing. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything still. There was much more, but
if you, I would like to invite, if you would like to add any of your own takeaways, you can do so on the whiteboard. It's open here, so anyone who would like to also add some extra key takeaways, just go ahead and add it on the whiteboard, and we collect them all in one place.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leonie. Nina, would you like to share your findings?
Yes, thank you. So big shout out to the group. Thank you for leaning into working on this quite nuanced aspect of learning organization, which is the learning culture. We had the chance to reflect what does help ourselves to learn, and then through that extrapolate, basically some of the behaviors and values which are needed around shaping a learning culture. We build a foundation on the four essentials of learning culture. That a learning culture is there when learning feels safe, when learning feels expected, supported, and applied. And then we had the chance to, what really struck me is, I think, mentioning that to enable basically a learning culture, it's not only about gaining new knowledge, but it's also around letting go and creating space for new knowledge. I think that was a beautiful insight that came into our discussion. Another one was the role of power when it comes to basically learning and sharing together, and how that can sometimes get in the way of people being vulnerable and being open to learn and share their mistakes or failures or lessons learned, and how there's this expectations from that hierarchy or even race or different parts of our identities can impose in a certain relation, which are relational, of course, this relational dimension of culture within organizations. Another aspect that was mentioned is that it seems that leaders are generally open to being vulnerable and sharing that they don't know, and model that they learn through their practice. But what seems to be the challenge is that there's a lot of emphasis on the value of success, and then failure is not necessarily rewarded or celebrated. And another thing that was mentioned is that daring to change is challenging. We may learn, but the actual follow-up of using that learning and applying it should be a leadership capability, should be something that should be celebrated and even incorporated as a competence, as a capability that can be cultivated in an organization. So in that way, hopefully there's more mainstreaming. I'll be, if you're curious to learn more about learning culture and would like to have a little coffee around it, I'm open also to share and reflect together, nerd out on it. So I'll put my details in the chat. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Nina. We'll also make sure to share the contact details of our different hosts who would like to stay in touch after this session. Last but not least, Sarah.
Yes, and I'll try to keep it very brief because I know we're already over time, but I loved our conversation and the little the group that we had and the sharing that happened. So we looked a little bit at how we can integrate learning better with processes, and then also what tools or systems might be able to help us. I think one thing that was mentioned is that often it's still done kind of informally. It's seen as kind of extra work to write things down, right? And therefore often not done. And also interestingly, someone mentioned it's kind of this assumption that I already know my things. If I'm, for example, writing a proposal, or that everyone kind of already knows what they need to know, and that is then not facilitate in such a way. So we looked a little bit at the push and pull effect. When do I need input from others? When do I maybe have something to share, and start really from the process side? And then trying to see, okay, how can this connect to learning practices? Where then it was mentioned that thinking about this as part of the feedback culture is definitely important, and trying to build practices as part of this. Looking at also, for example, tools like AI, how that can help simply with these sort of things, makes it easier potentially. Us from our side of the tool, we also have, we've been looking into how we can kind of lower the barriers for actually documenting things, right? For encouraging people to write things down and share it with others. Then what else did we have? One thing also is to look at how, how we can start small and make learning like a habit that we can build up in, again, a learning or an enabling learning environment with an open feedback culture, for example. Then also connecting back to the framework and what we discussed, building in the measuring aspect, right? To show progress towards learning, how you can just show with the team also how we're growing as a learning organization. And then last, something that was mentioned, also considering systems and tools and learning practices that you obviously also just need the space and time to do it. And to think about, how you can get the buy-in from donors to do this, to build out your learning practice more and more. So these were some of the things now mentioned. So thanks for everyone in my session, and please feel free to add something else. And I shared my contact also in the chat because I'd love to follow up on these conversations.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, well, again, to all the breakout hosts. We'll make sure to share any materials or resources we have, as well as contact information by email after the session. We'll also publish recap and recording of the session and share it with you. Yeah, I would like to close this because I know we're already running out of time. Just want to really thank you all for participating. It felt a little bit like we had a learning party here, a lot of familiar faces. It's really great to have the space for this. And that said, there will be another session. We've gone from learning in programs to learning in organizations today, and then our last session will focus more on learning in partnerships, and most of all, power relations in learning. So how can we take this into account, and what alternative methods of learning do we know? So we're still looking for people who would like to maybe share their experiences on this in their organization, or would like to contribute to this session. So if you're interested, please send an email to Sil, or my colleague who's been really helping out today with all the technical facilitation. I shared this email on the chat. And again, please also share your feedback to this session by filling out the form. And then indeed, we can continue the learning party and hopefully also invite some more people. So thank you all so much, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks for organizing, and great to meet you all.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.